Welcome back, everyone, to the Broker Room podcast. I'm Michael Simon, and today we have with us Mackenzie Damerow. Welcome, Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a senior associate broker at Hoyt Properties in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, specializing in industrial and office flex spaces. She helps clients buy, sell, and lease commercial properties across the metro. Growing up in a two-broker household, real estate has been part of her life from the very beginning. So, Mackenzie, thank you again for joining us. Let's get right into it.
Perfect.
Coming from a real estate family, your parents are both brokers. How did growing up in that environment shape your path, and what led you to focus specifically on industrial and office flex brokerage in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, so my parents, as you'd mentioned, started in real estate probably close to 2 decades ago. My mom was the first. She actually got her start in mortgage lending, and then transitioned into real estate sales as a broker herself. Again, all residential. And then my stepdad, he decided to join just shortly after 2008. He was in the car sales world. He had owned his own dealership and he had sold it to help her because she was having an explosion in sales post or around 2008. So they've been full time working together as a husband and wife team. Like I said, for almost 2 decades now. That said, I grew up watching them talk deals around the dinner table. Obviously, went on some tours with them, did some open houses with them. And what I remember just kind of taking away from the whole experience and what I guess ultimately kind of drew me to real estate was the lifestyle that they led and the flexibility that they had. So they, being I'm an only child, they were able to show up for every single sporting event, every single school event. We went on vacations. They just had complete and utter flexibility in terms of their schedule. So that was super attractive to me. And they were good at what they did. So they, theoretically had a limitless earning potential as far as, what they wanted to bring home. And that seemed to be representative of the amount of time that they put into their career. So that's what drew me to it, I guess, initially. And then I went to school up here in the cities, got my real estate license when I turned 18, was working for them residentially, just kind of pay my way through college. And then the college that I chose actually had a finance degree that had a real estate emphasis or a real estate focus. So my degree is actually in real estate. And kind of learning about all the different paths that I could go, I was introduced to commercial. And I'm from a small town, so I didn't really know what commercial was. And then when I moved up to the cities, got, I guess, a crash course in all the different options. I wanted to stay. I thought I looked at development. I looked at the different types of positions you can go into, but I stuck with brokerage or I stuck with sales just because that's what I knew. That's what I thought I was good at. And as far as how industrial found me, the company that I interned with, Hoyt Properties, and the one that I'm obviously still at, they focused on industrial. And in commercial, it's typically recommended you have a niche, that you have a asset class that you focus on, and sometimes even you have an area within the metro or within the area that you're selling that you focus on. So I don't just specialize in industrial real estate in the Twin Cities. I specialize in industrial real estate, particularly in the South Metro, just because the North or the West, they can be entirely different markets and different terms and things that are markets. So
Sure.
it's good to specialize. But anyway, so Hoyt Property focuses on industrial, and that's how I started.
That's an incredible story, Mackenzie. And
Thank you.
yeah, now that you have found, your niche, and like you said, the markets can vary, from area to area. So you're kind of, you can be all over the place, really. What does a typical day or client engagement look like for you right now?
Typical day, if we always have the running joke, if you're doing your job well, you're not in the office much, meaning you're out and about at tours, you're out and about doing site visits, meeting with clients, pitching services, whatever, canvassing. So canvassing can mean you're driving around the different industrial parks, looking at buildings that maybe look underparked or overparked as indicators of potential business either problems or growth. Um, so I'd say if I had to estimate on a day-to-day basis, networking, cold calling, driving around, that kind of thing takes up probably about or should take up about 50 to 60% of my day. And then if I've got a busier client load at that point, obviously those numbers can shift and maybe I'm more out doing and pushing forward deals. And then obviously you have to allot a slight amount of time just for clerical type upkeep work, emails, that kind of thing, in the office.
Of course. And do spend much time traveling too, or do you focus mostly in the Twin Cities area?
Uh, Personally, I travel, but not for
Hmm.
work. So we do a lot, or singularly here, really in the metro. I mean, obviously we're licensed for the entire state of Minnesota, but I guess myself personally, I focus just here in the metro.
Okay. And so, I want to just zero in on that for a little bit. So, the Minneapolis St. Paul market has its own unique dynamics in the industrial and office space. So, from your perspective, what are the biggest trends you're seeing right now in industrial leasing, sales, and the office flex properties?
Yeah, so obviously, I don't know if you've been following, nationwide, what's been happening, just I guess more specifically here in Minneapolis over the last few years. We've had kind of a rough go of it, in terms of Minneapolis proper, with some political stuff happening. And then obviously when COVID happened,
Yeah.
we really just saw all of the offices, just the whole office atmosphere change, right? And then, like I said, locally here, we felt a lot of pressures that caused a lot of businesses to either want to get out of Minnesota entirely, which was really unfortunate, but then also a massive push to get out of the downtown CBD area. So, as far as office goes, was really a rough go of it for the last few years. It's starting to build itself back up. We're starting to see new leasing activity down in the CBD districts and whatnot, but there's still a tremendous amount of office space that is either vacant or up for sublease, or going, buildings, office buildings downtown going back to the bank. So it's an interesting world, but like I said, that's not my focus. So as far as how that affected industrial or flex properties, when everybody was doing that great migration out of downtown, we did, as owners of flex properties here in the Twin Cities, see a huge spike in interest in our spaces, because obviously a flex property means it can theoretically lend itself to a manufacturing user or an all office user. So it's office space without the high prices of office, and usually in a suburb. So we definitely are seeing trends that way, people wanting to come out and still get into the suburbs. But as far as industrial goes, I think one of the hottest trends right now is small bay industrial. So we're seeing really spaces, the most in demand, kind of sub 10,000 square feet for lease. So investors are looking to capitalize on that. With the lowest vacancy rates being in that size range, they're looking to buy properties. Maybe they're 50, 60, 70,000 square feet, half the time not even that big, and they're dividing them up into little bays for lease, maybe sweet spot being 4 to 6,000 square feet each bay.
And if we take a look at, what challenges that can present, it sounds like it was to the effect of, there's a lot of those spaces, but just not that many people buying. Did I get that correctly?
For office space, you were saying, or for what?
For that and for the industrial.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for the small bay industrial, it's the lowest vacancy rate right now in just industrial space across the board. Our space is kind of sub 5,000 square feet. Again, this is just Minneapolis market. I don't know elsewhere. So investors were looking to buy up properties that had either those capabilities or the either were already set up to accommodate small bay. So that's, I don't know if that was your question, but
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So definitely, they're just looking at what spaces are sitting vacant, um, and what is obviously the most in demand. And right now, I think in the Minneapolis market across the board, vacancy rates for properties or spaces under 5,000 square feet are at about 3 to 4%. So quite low.
That presents an interesting opportunity. And
Yeah.
then, I would ask, we talked a little bit about the past, the present. What do you think? I know none of us have a crystal ball, but, if we take a look at maybe some potential opportunities happening right now and then maybe looking ahead at the next 6 to 12 months, what do you think that looks like for you personally and your practice?
It's a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think One of the things that comes out to my mind, my mom once said to me when I got into the industry that the best agents typically shine or rise above kind of in the worst markets, right? And there's not anything that's super revolutionary about that, but if I apply that to what we've been going through over these last few years with just a lot of kind of up and down, right? We had the unknowns of the recent election year. We had the unknowns of the proposed tariffs and things after that. We had the unknowns of inflation, and now we have the unknowns of war, right? And what's
Yep.
going on geopolitically and internationally. And I think that, there's a lot of just hesitation in the market, not because there's a lack of capital necessarily, at least just commercially speaking, but people are not really diving in there and wanting to invest either as an investment or as a investment into their business, just because they don't know where things are going to go. So when there is that hesitation and that pause in the market, I really think that's when, as my mom says, the good agents shine. They can dig their heels in, tap into their existing networks, tap into their existing contacts, and really just continue to prove to their clients why they are a resource, and I guess just keep getting them updated information. And I think the ones that aren't willing to put in that work and continue to follow up and continue to just keep grinding, those agents will fall off, right? And then obviously when the market picks back up and everyone wants to get back in on it, you'll see the influx of new agents come back in. But so opportunity as far as just continuing to believe in the fact that the market is cyclical, there's always going to be ups and downs. But right now, typically and historically speaking, when markets are down or they're tough, this is usually where opportunity arises just because not a lot of people are willing to gamble and go in, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think if I look at Minneapolis specifically, um, all of those downtown buildings or those office buildings that are underutilized or vacant or um, I mean, you can buy them for pennies on the dollar in terms of what they were worth, 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's a big gamble. Obviously, I don't have hundreds of millions of dollars, but if I did, I would bet on the city, and I would bet on the fact that historically speaking, it's going to come back, and you can get in and own some of these large underutilized office properties for 70% off what they probably should be worth today, um, and I don't know what you would do with it, but if you have the ability to hold it and wait and just pay it down and know that, in 10 years, 15 years, it's going to be 10 times what you paid for it, that feels like a pretty good rate of return on investment.
Yes, absolutely it does. It seems like, you and your mother certainly have a very, glass half full approach, which I love. No matter what industry you're in, really, when the times are bad, you simply have to learn to adapt and overcome. And, that comment you just made too about the properties, buying them 10, 15 years ago, watching them how they appreciate over time. Being from Rhode Island, I'm in about 10 minutes outside of Providence, but one of the nice beach towns we have is called Narragansett. And whenever I drive by there with my father, he always laments about the fact, like, we drive by these condos, he goes, "I could have bought those dirt cheap, like, 20
Right,
years ago, 30 years ago when you were just a kid, and they would have been worth
right,
millions now." So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
yeah, I mean, that can be all, extrapolated into any type of investment, right? Like it doesn't have to be the big downtown office buildings because obviously your average Joe doesn't have $10 million to buy an office building. But yeah, I think the point is just believing in real estate, knowing that it's going to come back, right? And just another really good another really good mantra I've heard from investors that are much smarter than I is that you can always overpay for a bad property, but you can never overpay for a good one. And I think, obviously take it with a grain of salt. It's obvious there's obviously too high to pay, but value is ultimately dictated by what someone is willing to pay for it, right? So I think if you find a solid building or you find a solid performing asset, it's just a matter of um, I guess running the numbers and thinking of your strategy, right? Like, are you a long-term holder? Are you a short-term holder? How do you want to approach it? But if you're a long-term holder and you believe in the fact that this is a good property, chances are over time it's going to prove you correct.
Right. And, coming from a background of when I used to be a financial advisor, I would kind of run into similar conversations with clients where they were kind of looking for always something to help get rich right now versus,
Right.
they weren't too keen on the concept of, investing in the market now and letting it appreciate over time. It's the same exact concept, whether it's real
Right.
estate or, index funds, stocks, whatever it may be. You have to be patient. That's the bottom line. And you have to think about what this is going to look like in the future. Everything's not just going to be, get rich quick or, get what you want right now. Unfortunately, as human beings, we're all a little bit wired that way, but
More
it's like you
patient.
said, you have to watch the market and just, it's gonna go back up eventually. Even though things don't look good right now, it's gonna pass. It always does.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just what's the difference between, I guess, wealth and liquidity, right? If you want to build liquidity, if you want to get rich quick, I don't know that with the current interest rate market and inflation, I don't know that real estate is your bet, right? But if you want to build wealth, real estate has always been your bet. That and probably the stock market, right?
Yeah, yeah. My grandmother, excuse me, not my grandmother, my aunt had passed, they lived together, but she passed about 2 years ago. And yeah, my dad, he got her house and, I think he said it was like 26,000 when they bought it. It's over 100 years old and they sold it for over 400,000. So, I mean, there you go. But
Exactly.
nobody thinks like that when they buy a home though. So that's the problem.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yep. Now, so speaking of, and again, thank you for that input there. Really,
Yeah.
really great stuff. So, when we talk about the markets and adapting and overcoming, this is my favorite topic, of course, as you know, AI. So,
Mhm.
you know, let's start with how do you think it's affected the industry as a whole? And by extension, have you seen it, personally affect your practice at all? Like, have you used it or seen other people use it?
Yeah, I think that AI has had already a tremendous impact on the industry. I think, like anything, there is always a lot of chatter and a lot of, for a lack of better words, I'll just say kind of hysteria. And hysteria has like a negative connotation to it, which in some cases I do believe that it is negative hysteria. But there's also been a lot of just craze and excitement around it that is on the very positive side. Like if you're not using AI, you're failing as a business owner, and it's just like there's a lot of extremes.
Yep.
Um, and I tend to kind of be in the middle. I think certainly there are people and within my industry that could and can benefit from the use of AI. I think a lot of it needs a little bit more context, right? Like where are the areas within your business that you're looking to use the AI, and does that really actually work or not? Where I've seen it be kind of a detriment is I think people are becoming maybe a little overly reliant on it in a way that really minimizes a lot of their critical thinking and minimizes a lot of their like I feel like they're not reviewing it, like they're trusting it too much, right?
Yes.
Or um it's really, in my opinion, supposed to be a tool, not something to just do your job, right? It's supposed to be something to enhance and work with you and not replace entirely all of your labor. So like for instance, myself, sometimes I want to just throw together an email that I don't want to think about. I just want to get all my thoughts out. I don't want to think about, is this going to sound nice or what's the tone or grammar or whatever, right? Get my email out, and then I'll plug it into AI and say, hey, this is the message I'm wishing to convey. Please proof this, whatever. And then instead of just copy and pasting what AI gives me, I reread it. I still make a couple of edits, make sure it aligns. So yes, at the end, does it maybe take me a little longer than if I were to have just wrote that email myself? Sure, but I do believe that when we combine both my brain power and the AI, that it does give me a better product in the end. And that is where I think, and that's a very simplified. I know that AI can do a million more things than draft an email, but I guess my point is that's a really simplistic um, point or simplistic version of what I'm trying to say about this industry. Is I think when you use it as a tool, it can be incredibly helpful, be it with creating calling data spreadsheets, be it marketing campaigns, marketing brochures, just databases, right? All of those things. If you use it as a tool, it's super complementary and can ultimately make you have a better business and better products within your business. But if you completely rely on it to just completely take over entire veins of your business, I think that's where it gets a little dicey because at the end of the day, it's not perfect, right?
Right. I'm in total agreement with you. And so is practically everybody I've ever had, come on. this podcast, what you said right in the beginning of that, trying to stay in the middle, that's really the key point. You have to find the right balance. AI certainly has its place, to help make things better, not only for you, but for the client, as well. It creates a better experience for everybody. But again, you got to make sure, like you said, you're not overdoing it because when you do, then not only does it take away that human aspect from it, but, there's just so much room for error. As good as AI is, it's not perfect. It's going to make mistakes. And,
Right.
you just can't be too overly reliant on it. And the trend that I've seen and universally everybody else is seeing too is, what it's going to do, it's not going to get rid of agents, completely. But what it is going to do is, widen the gap between those who do use it versus those who don't. And this is funny, but, I don't know if you heard about that guy who sold his house in Florida with AI completely.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, there's a very interesting article on that. Still not quite sure how he pulled it off, what he did, but, something like that, like, that's an anomaly. If somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, Mike, it's starting to happen. This guy already just sold his house without an agent," like, that's not gonna be the
No,
norm. Buying, whether it's a home, industrial complex, whatever it may be, those are very big emotional decisions. You can't just go
100%.
through a machine for that.
100%. Well, and I'll even just say, at the risk of making it sound like commercial is so much more difficult or better than residential, and I'm certainly not saying that. Residential is typically, on paper, a much more simplistic transaction than a commercial transaction.
Sure.
Theoretically, you could buy a house in, well, 30 days, right? Or 15 days if you've got the funds, right?
Yep.
Um, that I'm not going to say it's impossible in commercial, but almost, usually, right? You
Yep.
know, our standard contingency period right now is anywhere from 60 to 90 days, and if you're doing um, non-traditional financing, it can be upwards of 120 to 180 days. So I'm just thinking about, if I'm someone wanting to buy a commercial asset and I'm only using AI, you're going to trust AI to do potentially upwards of 180 days worth of work, like, and it's not just, oh, plug this contract in and go. Like, there are so many moving parts, and also um different parties, like municipal parties and government and things that are influencing a commercial purchase that are not using AI, right? So, like,
Right.
it would just I just don't ever see that going away. I think at the end of the day, to assume that everybody at some point in future is going to want to just deal with a robot, I don't buy that. I think that at the end of the day, it's really just a preference. I think some people would prefer it, and I think a lot of people won't. Um, yeah, that's my opinion. I don't ever feel that our job is going to entirely go away. Um, I think it might change. We may turn into more of like a consultant basis than like a salesperson. Um, but, we've seen so many horror stories, even from lawyers on panels and things in my industry, talking about people trying to renegotiate a purchase agreement and having run it through AI. And the lawyer's like, that's not even correct. Like, that's not even, it's close, but the robot's not quite correct here. And here's why, because it doesn't quite understand all of the context and the nuance of the situation. And I think same thing can be just applied to a salesperson in general commercially, because there is, like I said, so much more nuance that typically goes into a commercial transaction, multi millions of dollars at times, as opposed to a residential purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to use it as a tool to help, cross your T's, dot your I's,
Yeah,
fine. Okay. To help make it a
absolutely.
bit more efficient. But, to like draft something of that nature, like you just mentioned, like, no, give me an attorney for that, please. Or just
Right.
something else that's relevant to the buying process. Like, I'll let the humans handle that. Then maybe I can use the AI for something, smaller, or again, just to, I guess, maybe double checks a couple things. But
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
extent of it for me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, wrapping up on AI, do you have a particular wish list for it? But for your practice specifically, do you wish, would you like to see it do anything for you, or do you think it could be of more value in any way for anybody else for that matter?
Hmm. Um, like I said, to me, honestly, um, the way that I like to use it is really just as like a second set of eyes for some additional kind of like throw some ideas at the wall of, how might I make this email a little bit better? How might I make this marketing campaign a little bit better? Those kinds of things. I know a lot of people in my industry also use it heavily for like database generation, like cold calling generation, that kind of a thing. But, I just I don't know that I yet want to have it be a larger part of my day to day just because I don't know that it feels super genuine. Like an example of that is, you go on LinkedIn now and I feel like every post you scroll through is so obviously AI generated in terms of like the scripty little thing that they post,
Oh, yes.
and I don't want my emails and my business to sound and look like what feels now like a dime a dozen. I feel like everybody kind of sounds and talks and looks and acts the same in terms of your online presence or in terms of your marketing presence. Um, so I don't know. But and I know that didn't really answer your question, but I think at this point I just need to learn, as it continues to develop, see where maybe a spotlight is shown on my business specifically that highlights some areas that maybe are not as successful that AI could potentially help in, maybe from an organization standpoint or from a like a record keeping or databasing type standpoint that I could see maybe being helpful. But anything above and beyond that feels like I might be losing my human touch on my marketing approach in my business.
Sure. No, you have a healthy skepticism of it, and I don't blame you. And if you were to, use something generic like Claude or Grok or ChatGPT, whatever it may be, that's kind of where the robotic responses kind of tend to come from because a lot of people use
Right.
that in their everyday lives. But,
Right.
for someone like me, for example, with my business, when I provide AI solutions to owners, part of the process is actually customizing that to make sure it sounds, as fine tuned to be speaking with like you or somebody you work with as possible. It
Right.
takes record of your voice, your scripting, everything. Even how I get in touch with a lot of people myself. I have an AI sales development representative that, sends emails out. And one person who I had come on even said, like, oh, was that an AI assistant I was talking to? And I said, yes, yes, it was. And they were actually very impressed because they had no idea.
Yeah.
And it's funny though, because he had mentioned that he talked to somebody else about doing a podcast. And when he asked him the same question, I guess the language was a little bit different. He clearly knew it was AI. But when he asked
Sure.
him, he goes, "Oh, no, no, it was me." And the guy was like, "That was really
Mm,
you?" And he goes,
yeah.
"Yeah, yeah, it was." But it was so painfully obvious that it wasn't. And
Right.
the guy said to me, like, "Why lie about that?" And I said, "It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe they feel like it's somehow underhanded, but it's really not. That's, what you do. That's your product or part of
Right.
what you can do anyway." I'm proud of that he spoke to my AI SDR and, had no idea it was AI. And even if he did know, it's not to try to be sneaky or underhanded again. It's just, how I run my business. It's very effective and it's a great way to get in touch with and meet new people. So it's
Yeah.
not something that I, apologize for or hide behind. That's why I thought I laughed when he told me the other guy did as well. Maybe they don't believe in it as fully. I don't know. But getting back to what you said, yeah, I certainly understand your concerns. A lot of people I've spoken to as well had similar ones, but that's the benefit of, having a customized AI solution. You're not relying on something generic like, again, Claude, ChatGPT, or whatever it may be. So,
Right.
again, just something to, consider down the road because there are
Yeah.
certainly, ways to accommodate that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I know it's the way of the future, and obviously AI is only going to continue to get better. I mean, this the rate of change that we've seen um visually and with media over even just this short, call it 2, 3 year period is insane. What was a AI generated image 3 years ago is like night and day to what it would be today. So,
It is. Mackenzie, as we come up on time here, I really want to thank you again for all this information. But
yeah.
before we wrap up here, one thing I always like to, end an episode with is if there was somebody, coming into the industry today, fresh, brand new, let's just say right out of college, I guess,
Mhm.
what would be some, words of wisdom for them in getting started?
Is like as a real estate salesperson.
Yes. Sorry.
No, no,
Yes.
you're good. And the reason I ask is career advice in general and real estate advice are, somewhat different, but not really. More that I think about, I think my biggest piece of advice um, would be to find a company that is willing to invest in you and not from you.
Hmm.
And I think that's incredibly, maybe in one part obvious, but incredibly important, especially when you think about it in a brokerage context or with a brokerage lens, because I think oftentimes we forget that we are independent contractors and that we are, when interviewing with companies, really, if you think about it, we should be the ones interviewing the companies that we're looking to work for because we're the ones that we're going to be placing our licenses there, right? We're going to be bringing in money for the company. A lot of those people in brokerage are not salaried or not on something other than a 100% commission based type program. So theoretically, it doesn't cost that company much to have you there, if anything at all, right? So everything that you would bring in would be just purely profit and benefit to the company. So finding a company that acknowledges that, knows that, appreciates that, and is willing to put in time and energy and money and resources into training you and letting you shadow and really kind of mentoring you is significantly more important than just going with the largest flagship name and trying to get in with the biggest company for notoriety, and now you've become a slave to the system, and really they're just looking to get any and everything from you and basically build off of you versus build with you. um, and again, like I said, I think that's in one part common sense, but I see it happen all of the time with new brokers coming into the industry, and they fizzle out. They can't make it past year 2 or 3 for various reasons, but a lot of it being economic, right?
Right.
And if you're on a team that's willing to build with you, and knows that, hey, I've got to give more of my time and my resources to this young and up and coming broker, so that they can succeed and make it past year 2 or 3, then that's huge. It may not be the largest, flashiest firm, but you're going to become, I think, a better broker because of it.
Oh yeah, I would trade the mentorship and the guidance for, a big, fancy name anytime, any day, because you're going
Yeah,
to be able to take so much more away from it and not just become another statistic like you said. I think it's like what 85% fail out by year 2, something along those
yeah,
lines.
yeah. It's tough. I mean, I kind of going and opening a whole new can of worms. A lot of the people in the industry that have been doing this for a while, we talk often about how I think the barriers to entry in brokerage specifically and commercially really needs to change. Just with the cost of living and everything that seems to be consistently going up in today's world. It was normal 15, 20 years ago to be coming in as a broker or an intern and work for free, right? And just say, oh, it's so exciting to just be here and I'm getting all this experience. Well, I don't think that's very feasible now, considering what everything costs and how difficult it is to get transactions going and get started. So, that those barriers to entry are also significantly contributing to that statistic of brokers falling out in years 2 and 3. So it'll be interesting to see how larger companies, change their policies and their, um, I guess, their kind of compensation packages, because I do think it's going to need to happen to continue to entice young new people to come into the industry, certainly of different diversities and socioeconomic backgrounds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in full agreement. And again, Mackenzie, thank you. This has been great. You've given us a
Great.
clear, grounded look at industrial and office brokerage, along with thoughtful perspective on where the industry is headed. I want to thank you for sharing your journey and expertise. And before we go, if any of our listeners want to, learn more about you, what you do, or potentially even work with you, where would be the best place to do so?
Yeah, I think all of my contact information would be on my LinkedIn. So our company's website, my email, my cell. Obviously, message me there, but otherwise, you can go on our company's website at Hoyt Properties.
Okay, excellent. Well, Mackenzie, thank you again. This has been terrific. Really appreciate
Thank
you. Hope
you.
you have a wonderful day.
Right back at you. Thank you for having me.